This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Plain Talk Live. On Wednesdays, I'm going to have, normally a lot of these live streams have been interviews with newsmakers. On Wednesdays, it's going to be more of a discussion, right? More of a debate, I suppose, not the sort of political cage match debate you're used to seeing on cable news. I'm trying to select thoughtful people who don't necessarily agree with me on politics to have a discussion with. Because A, I think that sort of thing is interesting. B, I think our society needs it right now. So, that's what I want to do. What I don't want to do is have it devolve into shouting matches, which I don't think it will. And it's certainly, we can have these discussions, and I think they're important. So normally these broadcasts will be at 2 p.m. on Wednesdays, but today I have a doctor's appointment this afternoon, and I'm getting my second Moderna vaccination shot later this week. And I think, as most people know, I had a near miss with COVID late last year, where it was just a terrible thing for me. So I'm still having to doctor. I'm still having to go and deal with all that, but that's happening later today, so the live stream's a little bit earlier today than normal. My guest is Chad Oban. He's a former director of the North Dakota Democratic-NPL party. He is a husband to State Senator Erin Oban of Bismarck. I described him as a Democratic activist, and apparently he doesn't like that so much because he's retired from that or something. Chad, is that? I guess I got that. Sometimes it's hard to know how to describe people.
Well, I think, one of the things was I asked you not to describe me as my current professional position as executive director of the North Dakota United, the state's teachers and public employees union. So yeah. I wasn't offended by the language you use. I think Democrat activists were more offended by me being called an activist than anything else. But yes, I am proud to be the executive director of North Dakota United, but that's not why I'm on this show. And I want to be careful that I'm not getting too far out there in front of our members.
Yeah, Chad's here speaking as Chad Oban and not representing North Dakota United.
Or Erin Oban. I'm not here representing Erin
Oban. Erin Oban obviously could speak for herself. It doesn't need her husband to speak for. So we have a lot of fun topics today, including what we were just talking about actually before we started the stream, which was I think the struggle we're having with the extremes taking over politics, and that's such a deep topic. I think a lot of it is tied up with the rise of the internet, which has allowed the disaffected and the marginalized in a lot of good ways, but also a lot of maybe not so good ways to sort of take over, and they can organize more quickly. They can have a larger impact than maybe they have in the past. So I think that's interesting. To me it's I always say that this might be the most populist age in American history, and I say that because popularism or majoritarianism is kind of easy when you are organizing on the internet and Facebook. I mean, it has a huge influence to the point where I remember famously when one of the famous knocks on C-SPAN putting, and this is ancient history now, but C-SPAN putting cameras in the congressional chambers. Like at one time that was seen as this it seems kind of quaint now, but at the time it was seen as this sort of revolutionary thing. And one of the criticisms was that the politicians would just start pandering to the cameras. And sure enough, that's exactly what's happened. If anybody who's watched, one of a committee hearing where we call people that Democrats or Republicans don't like so that they can be berated by senators under the guise of questioning or fact-finding, and it's really just a bunch of preachy sermons. I think social media has had that same impact, where now politicians are performing. I wrote in a column recently that the politicians don't have constituencies anymore. They have audiences. And that bothers me. And we were talking about some of that, Chad. And you actually asked me a provocative question about whether I feel like if I played a role in that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that when I think about what's going on, particularly in North Dakota with I don't even want to say far right, because I think that there's not exactly ideological consistency with like the Bastiat type folks. I sort of saw that starting back in 2009 with the Tea Parties and going out to Kent Conrad and Byron Dorgan's town halls, and there was so much aggression. And I mean, frankly, you were part of that, right?
Yeah,
and so my question that I asked you was, do you feel somewhat of a role in creating this dynamic we're in right now, where it's the Trumpian and some of the stuff that you've been pretty critical of lately with the Basti? It's not really being focused on policy, but instead just focused on wins. So I mean, I think it's an interesting sort of move. This didn't just happen like that, right? Trump didn't come out of nowhere.
No, Trump. By the way, I think Trump. People give Trump. Maybe I do sometimes. Give Trump too much credit for creating things that he really just took advantage of, right? I mean, distrust of the news media wasn't created by Trump. He capitalized on it. Distrust of political institutions, sort of a very conspiracy-minded attitude. Trump didn't create that. Trump exploited it. So, I mean, those are very real things. As far as my role in it, I mean, certainly, I think I helped organize Tea Party rallies. I remember I made a map. I went hunting. I had to hunt for them because they weren't publishing them. Kent Conrad, Byron Dorgan, Earl Pomeroy's town hall locations. I would go and I created a map, a Google map that was embeddable. And this is way back in 2009. This was cutting edge technology at the time. I created that, and I was directing people to go there. Now, my intent was for people to go and legitimately ask questions and legitimately air their grievances, which is what a town hall should be for, not shouting at people and stuff. And I was never supportive of that. And I think if you look back at what I wrote at the time, I always asked people to be, to respect a certain level of decorum. But I think the problem is there's nothing inherently wrong with sort of populist political movements, which the Tea Party was. The problem is that we have these very populist movements now, or these very populist tools, and we're using them in a time where we just hate each other, and we don't want to talk to each other, and talking to each other is seen as some sort of a sign of. I know you were telling me you got grief for coming on and speaking with me today, because people think that I'm not somebody worth talking to.
Well, it's not that they don't think you're worth talking to. They just think you're somehow going to play a gotcha with me today. And I assured everybody I'd be just fine, even if you chose to do that. But it sort of takes away the premise of the program to come on here and just play a game of gotcha.
I can't even imagine what I'd get you about. I point out that you're super bald. I don't know. I mean, what? Gotcha, Chad.
I'm aware. I'm aware. I'm also a Dodgers fan. But I think, one of the things that we've really seen, particularly this session with the Bastiats, and the legislature has changed. It's changed dramatically, even in the last 6 to 8 years, where we've gotten, again, I try not to say conservative because I don't think it's conservative. I told you the other day that there was a conservative senator on the floor the other day that was talking against local control because if the local governments aren't doing what we want them to do, the central government in Bismarck should make the decisions. That doesn't sound very conservative to me in terms of decision making. So I think part of it is the lack of sort of thinking policy that's going on at the session. But I also think these traditional Republicans play a role in this. Right? I mean, you've written about it. The Bastiats are really, really good at organizing. Politics 101. You get your people to show up, and that's how you win things.
The saying is we're governed by the people who show up.
Yeah, and I think traditional Republicans maybe have had it too easy, and they haven't had to do those things. And I think, what's going to happen here is at some point, the traditional Republicans need to step up and organize, or they're going to get beat, or they're going to just decide it's not worth it. And there's going to be even more of a transition to this more conservative, because the districts that you wrote about the other day that are censuring people over Luke Simons, Democrats aren't winning those districts. Democrats have no chance of ever, well, I shouldn't say ever, but it's going to be
in the current moment. in the
places are
current moment, they're not going to win there.
Yeah.
So it's the thing, and believe it or not, I mean, people think I just have it out for the Bastiats, and to the extent that the Bastiats represent Trumpism, or perhaps the purest distillation of Trumpism in North Dakota, then yes, I have it out for them. I think Trumpism is somebody retweeted something I wrote on Facebook saying that Trumpism is a cancer in the conservative movement. Like this is something I'm ashamed of. I will tell you right now, Trumpism is a cancer in the Republican Party and the conservative movement. Just is. Republicans are going to come to rue the day. I think in some ways Republicans are going to reap a whirlwind here, particularly North Dakota Republicans, when it comes to embracing Trumpism, because Trumpism takes populism, which can already be unruly, and it infuses it with just a belligerent disregard for accountability, right? I mean, that's the pop. You look at like Matt Gaetz, what's going on with Congressman Matt Gaetz right now. You look at Trump himself. You look at a lot of Trump associates. Just an utter lack of shame. An utter refusal to take responsibility for their actions. I mean, it used to be a politician got caught in a scandal like that, they resigned, and they went to ground, they went to cover, and now it's no, I'm just gonna stick to my guns, and I'm gonna stick it up. Duncan Hunter, is another example who was under indictment and still in Congress. It's remarkable, and it's happening on the left too. Andrew Cuomo's still in office.
Sure.
So this it's not unique to but.
Well, and I don't think, Rob, that we have to look to Washington and New York. I mean, the stuff that happened with Luke Simons and still going on with Luke Simons is mind-numbing to me. Here's a guy who, I mean, perpetually sexually harassed young women at the Capitol. It didn't just happen once. This went on for years and years and years. And somehow the people who voted to expel him and said that our institution is better than this are now getting reprimanded, censured, or I've heard some rumors of people being recalled because they voted to remove Luke Simons. This is the sort of hill that Republicans in North Dakota are going to die on, defending Luke Simons.
Yeah. Well, that Luke Simons is now some sort of a martyr or some sort of a champion. Is remarkable to me, but it speaks to the mindset that I oppose, which is this: everything is a conspiracy, everything is people are out to get us or whatever. No, it's not a conservative ideal to just oppose whatever liberals are for. I mean, sometimes we can come together as human beings and say, no, this behavior is wrong. This behavior is completely not befitting somebody who's in elected office, and that person should be removed. It's shocking to me. And let's be clear about what I wrote about. There's a lot of people trying to claim that these resolutions to censure people or whatever in these legislative districts aren't about Luke Simons, that they're about the lawmakers, and they're not respecting the Republican platform, and they're not being. I'm sorry, some of these, Robin Wise in District 14, which is just one example, his voting patterns haven't changed.
Yep.
Right? He's been in the legislature for a long time. This is not new. This is not some new revelation about him, right? Saying that, he voted this way, he voted that way. That's not new, right? What changed is he was one of the lawmakers who voted to expel Luke Simons, and the Bastiat crowd, the Bastiat affiliated people. And I realize that can be a nebulous term. I'm using it because there's not a better one. The Bastiats won't really tell us who their memberships are. They're operating in secrecy. And then, when you call them on it, they try to claim, we're not Bastiats. Baloney. If you're not Bastiats, you're Bastiat aligned.
And it's not like the person who replaced Luke Simons, Representative, I think it's Hauk. It's not like she's voting any differently than how Luke voted on things.
As far as I know about her, she's a very conservative person.
Yeah, she's just doing it without sexually harassing people at the Capitol.
Right.
In the grand scheme of things, I would think that would be a net win for conservatives. But what do I know? But I also would just make the point that, at some point, these traditional Republicans need to take some power back. I mean, this session, we've seen time and time again where they're giving wins to some of these Bastiat ideas. Mask mandate, 10 commandments, other things like that I'm sure you hear the same thing. in closed doors, they're like, this is terrible policy,
Right.
but I have to vote for this. And then they wonder why the Bastiats feel empowered, because you're giving them wins.
Yeah. My argument to them when people have brought it to me is that the Bastiats are paper tigers. When the Bastiats are out in the open, when they can't, sort of hide secretly, or they're not ambushing. Like, the one thing they're good at is ambushing conventions, right? They're good at getting their people to show up, particularly local district conventions. We're even getting, depending on where you're talking about, I mean, getting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people of your people in the room could swing an election. That's just the reality. A lot of times these local district, there's not a lot of people that show up. If you get 100 people in the room, you're setting a record. So
And you're not saying that about Bastiats in a negative way.
No, they're very
right?
They're very good at organizing, and a lot of times the mainstream Republicans or the establishment Republicans, whatever they call them, when they call me and complain about this stuff, one of my messages to them is, well, that's the game, right? Don't whine at me because they beat you at the game, right? Now I understand. I don't necessarily want that strain of conservatism to be dominant, but if they play by the rules and they win, so be it. I want to beat them in the arena of ideas. I don't want to cheat. I don't want to lock people out of the convention process. That's not the road I want to go down. I want them to be defeated because I don't believe that they're the majority within the Republican circles in North Dakota. I don't believe that they are.
Well, as a former executive director of the Democratic Party and, a long-time person involved in the party establishment, how do you grow your party? You get people to show up to things.
Right.
And so if you're the Bastiats and you're getting people to show up and that's how you're growing your party, I mean, I think it's hard for traditional Republicans to complain about that. And they also have to understand a lot of these moderate Republicans, I shouldn't say moderate, traditional Republicans, people who are considered moderate, I remember 10 years ago, I thought were the most conservative people on earth, and we had to defeat them from the left. And now it's like, yeah, that person's really moderate compared to what's going on here. They have to stop giving them wins, and they have to understand that they're not going to remember the 3 times you voted with them. They're going to remember the 1 time you voted against them. And they're going to try to primary you, try to beat you in a convention. And I also get a kick out of folks saying, well, if I vote against them, they're going to beat me at the convention. Is being a North Dakota legislator that great that you would vote against your conscience or whatever because you don't want to lose at a convention? I don't understand that thinking. And maybe that's why there's only 7 Democrats in the Senate, right? Because I don't understand that thinking.
Yeah,
but
maybe.
It's hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people, and let's be a little bit fair to the people who are perhaps doing that calculation in their minds. They may see it that if I have to sacrifice or if I have to toe the line on a couple of these dumb votes, there's a lot of other very good policy that I can implement. That's not an unfair calculation.
Yeah, I think that's a completely fair point, Rob. And I think that they're looking behind them and thinking, okay, the person who's going to replace me isn't going to be good on 50%. They're going to be good on 0% of the issues that are important in North Dakota. So I think that's a really fair thing.
And also, I mean, when you're talking about lawmakers, it's intensely local, except for maybe some of these rural districts that are like the size of Connecticut.
Right.
But it's very intensely local, and that becomes intensely personal, and so it even eschews ideology to where it's just, I want to protect my neighborhood or my town or whatever. I want to make sure that my slice of North Dakota gets its fair share out of the budgets or is considered appropriately in the education funding formula or what have you. I mean, those things are genuinely important and are in fact why you should want to serve in the legislature if you care about those things. It's this.
I would also suggest, I mean, these folks that are serving in the legislature, God bless them, because they're not fun jobs. They don't get paid a ton of money.
Well, that's something else we were going to talk about, is a legislative pay thing. But let me just to stay on the Bastiat thing for a minute. Last night I was talking with a state senator who, if I said this person's name, you would immediately know, hugely pro-life person, right? I mean, known for it. Was telling me that they were frustrated because, at some of these local conventions, what we were just talking about, where these lawmakers are getting censured, one of the bills that they're getting censured on for not supporting was Representative Jeff Hoverson's bill. Representative Jeff Hoverson, Republican from Minot. a Bastiat lawmaker. And so one of the bills they're getting was his bill that made abortion a felony. And even so much so that if you gave a woman a ride to the abortion clinic, you could be charged with a crime, right? Now this, again, one of the most pro-life people I have ever met in my life is saying that's too far. That is bad policy. I voted against it, and I'm not going to support it, but yet somehow, if I didn't support that, I'm not sufficiently pro-life, who's been involved in the pro-life movement in North Dakota for literally decades.
Right.
But that's where the Bastiats are. It's a one bill. It was a Bastiat bill. It was one bill, and if you don't support it, you're against them, and you're a liberal, and you're a communist, and you're part of the establishment and everything else.
But I think, we've gone in North Dakota as far as we can to ban abortion. I mean, I don't know that there's any more piece of legislation that can go any further, right? But the legislature knows there's certain people that got elected to the legislature primarily to talk about abortion. And when there's nothing left to do, then you start doing those kind of crazy bills. But then you also tie things to abortion. I mean, the higher ed challenge grants got tied to abortion. There was a resolution on the floor the other day about fetal alcohol syndrome. And somehow Yana Myrdal connected it to abortion. And it was just like this bizarre connection. But there's just this desire to connect things to abortion because there's nothing else to do. North Dakota's done as much as they can.
The issue with the one issue that I take with the academic freedom, the challenge, there's hypocrisy all over the place because Planned Parenthood, and I realize if the abortion issue leaves you cold, I looked up Planned Parenthood's political giving. You know how much money they gave to Republicans in 2020?
How much?
$0. Yeah, 2018, 2016, $0. Even the NRA throws some money to some Democrats now and then.
But Rob, let me ask you this: should the government, should the state of North Dakota, be picking winners and losers and banning one group because of their political giving? I mean, I've sat through the training that's so controversial, and you know what? It's really great.
I've actually said you said there's nothing left to do on abortion. Yes, there is. Promote birth control.
Amen.
So I'm not against the curriculum, but the people who are screaming keep politics out of higher education, who are partnering with one of the most rabidly partisan organizations in the country, that doesn't pass the smell test for me. And by the way, they're all these challenge grants. When the challenge grants first passed in 2013, and if you don't know what the challenge grants are, essentially it's a matching. There's $1 in state money for every $2 that a university can go out and raise. And the first thing that the university started using these challenge grants for was sports scholarships, right? So all these high and mighty idiots from the university system are telling us, oh, it's about academic freedom. It's about keeping politics out of higher education. When at issue is a partnership with a thoroughly partisan organization. I can't imagine all these academics going to the mattresses to defend grant money from the NRA, but it's Planned Parenthood, so I guess that's okay.
Well, but Rob, again, I wouldn't call them idiots, first of all. I thought we were going to be talking nice about people and not calling names here.
Fair enough.
So I wouldn't call them idiots.
Fair enough. I'll put a quarter in my swear jar. I'm
not talking about – you're connecting this to politics, and I'm thinking about the policy.
And to be fair, the legislation connects it to abortion. I'm the one drawing the political connection.
Yeah. But I think, again, the policy and the training that they did was really, really good for kids.
It was.
And at-risk kids. And so
I don't buy for a minute that you can't do that. You can't promote that curriculum without Planned Parenthood.
But if Planned Parenthood is an organization that's best equipped to provide this training, why should the state legislature say you can't work with this one group because of their political giving or because of something they do, not even in the state of North Dakota?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a fair question, and I would probably feel better about that argument if the people making it were consistent, which they're not. Sure. Which is the sticking point. Which is the sticking point for me. I hear grumbling all the time. NDSU has and I'm forgetting it. It's an economic freedom institute or something like that. Now, Joshua Jackson, I think, is in charge of it. I'm forgetting the name of it now.
Economic, yeah.
But I hear grumbling about that all the time. Bunch of free market right wingers on campus, blah blah blah. I don't know. I mean, higher education is not a very welcoming place to right of center thought. And
Rob,
if you want to talk about a lot of what's happening in society right now, where we have this sort of cultural balkanization, the fact that the left controls our most important cultural institutions, the entertainment industry, the news media, academia, and these are places that are actively hostile to conservative thought, to the point where we now have, the entertainment industry. If a legislature passes a law that I guess Hollywood activists don't like, we're going to punish that state now. I mean, that's where we're living at. You don't think that contributes to the sort of cultural balkanization we're talking about?
yeah, I agree. We should get corporations and entertainment industry out of politics altogether, and I think we would all be happy with that. I
Yeah.
think that would be good.
I'd like to just
Let's-
watch baseball and not hear a sermon about politics.
Yeah. But I think it's funny, in terms of right of center thought on college campuses. There's a free speech bill that's passed the legislature, and there was a college Republican who testified on favor of it, and how she doesn't feel like she could express herself in classes, that she's a Republican out of fear of retaliation. And the Democrat on the committee said, yeah, I can't relate to that at all at the state capitol, being a Democrat here, right? So I think that I don't feel too bad for conservatives in the state of North Dakota not being able to express themselves.
Admittedly, it's not as much of a problem here as it is elsewhere. That's absolutely fair. If we want to talk about populism, though, the legislative pay issue is another hugely interesting issue. And I had to laugh at my own company's headline, because the headline was screaming, legislators are going to pay raise their own pay. And I'm like, well, who else can raise it? They're the legislature. Yeah. Nobody else could set their pay. But I guess the people could do an initiated measure. But that's not very likely that a group of citizens are going to get together and say, hey, let's pay our legislators more. But I mean, to me, that's the sort of populist attitude where it's just assumed that these people shouldn't be, they're paid too much, they shouldn't be paid anything. I mean, that's the sort of populist reactionary stuff that I'm against. Why don't we sit down and think, what does it actually take to serve in the legislature? And you actually, part of your household income, you married to a legislator, so you're maybe a little bit compromised on this discussion. But I don't understand. I mean, some of these, I always think of Keith Kempenick, who's a state representative from a rural district out in southwest North Dakota that's the size of Connecticut, that he has to cover with no staff. He gets $500 a month, or $400, whatever it is a month, when the legislature's not in session. And he signed up for the job, so I don't. But could we get maybe better candidates if the job, if it wasn't such a huge financial sacrifice to serve?
So two things on that. First of all, yeah, full disclosure, we're going to be rolling in that 1.5% increase at the Oban household.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
We're going to be rolling in it.
You got to add a wing to the house on, right?
Yeah, two comments on that. One, I think one of my biggest concerns with those headlines you talked about is the legislature is now tied their pay increase to state employee pay increases. And so there's never going to be a scenario where state employees get a 4% raise or a 3% raise because they got zero previous bienniums, because the legislature isn't going to want to take the heat of that headline saying we're getting a 3% raise or a 4% raise or whatever. So I think the legislature tying it to state employees, really smart for the legislators, but bad for those hardworking state employees who are trying to make ends meet. And we know that state workers make, something like 10% less than people in the private sector. So that's point one.
Unless we start looking at total compensation, in which case I sure would love to have the health insurance that they have as somebody who works in the private sector.
Sure. The health insurance makes up for some of the lack of pay. And I think that as soon as state workers get paid the same amount as people in the private sector and salary,
I don't want to cut their benefits. I'm just saying, if we're going to do a comparison, let's look at total compensation.
Yep, and I agree with that 100%. The second thing, though, is you brought up Keith Kempenick, and he got a lot of
he got roasted
at the beginning of the session because of the way he talked about meals.
Right.
I think what he was trying to say, the poor guy went from lobster meals paid for by lobbyists to eating SpaghettiOs. But the overall point here is the way our legislature compensates people and the way it's run with 80 days every 2 years. And I know firsthand, they're working a lot more during those non 80 days than people want to give them credit for. Are we dissuading working people from participating in the legislature, right? We often have very young people, retired people, business owners. I think there's one active teacher right now, Senator Poolman, in the legislature. There's hardly any working parents who are in the legislature. Should we be looking at how we do this a little bit differently to get more points of view? You sometimes look at the video of the legislature, and it's a bunch of guys that look like how you and I are going to look in 20 years, right? And are we going to have, maybe less for some of us, but those I'm worried about working moms, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's only 3 or 4 working moms in that are worried about
or young working dads or anybody. I mean, that's exactly my point. Why we should want it. Serving in the legislature, we want to. I mean, really, it's as much as like an employer, right? If you're running a business and you want to recruit good talent, then you got to have a competitive compensation package. And unfortunately, the compensation for people who serve in government is exceedingly political. To the point where I remember when there would be consternation, particularly under Hoban and remember the big fight between Doug Burgum. Doug Burgum didn't want to take his salary, right? Because everybody knows Doug Burgum's been hugely successful in the private sector. He's a super rich dude, and so he went on the campaign trail like, I'm not going to take the salary. And everybody, I remember making fun of him at the time. Like, you think this is a rounding error in the state budget? Like, this is nothing. Governor Burgum, if you don't want to take, just donate it to salary or something if you don't want to take it. But don't say, because I mean, the reason why I was opposed to that is I want somebody who's not rich to be able to run for governor and feel like they could still make ends meet. If all of a sudden the expectation is that the governor doesn't get a salary, who can run for that job but the independently wealthy?
Right. And I remember legislators that first session, I think Bob Martinson was one of them, who really made that case. We don't want to set a precedent here that you have to be independently wealthy or somehow have somebody else paying your cost of living as governor. I mean, that's not a good precedent either. So I agree 100%. And, it may sound self-serving that I think legislators should be served more, but I assure you my wife is not going to be a lifetime legislator, so the benefit for me will be a short one.
Yeah, well, and I just obviously just wanted to point that out, not to
yeah.
Not that your point of view doesn't matter, but somebody will point it out. Hey, he's married to a lawmaker.
Well, I just get a kick out of knowing how little they get paid and what 1.5% means on that little. Well, and now that they have to pay for their own meals too and don't have lobby.
At one point, I mean, I've had people approach me about running for the legislature, and first of all, that's a terrible idea. I am not temperamentally suited to serve in a chamber like that. Also, I can't do the job that I do while I'm in the chamber, right? I'd have to stop, and I don't want to stop. So I always joke, but I didn't. But I mean, supposing that I wanted to, and supposing that I wasn't Rob Port, who makes a living from writing about lawmakers, I couldn't afford to do that, to take 4 months off every other year, and not all the interim commitments. For me, I mean, for a lawmaker that lives in Bismarck, it's not a big deal, but I mean, I have to drive down to Bismarck for interim committee hearings all the time. And I realize we've started to move to where we can do some of that remotely, which I think is smart. Maybe one of the few silver linings of the pandemic is hopefully that's going to be a permanent change, because I don't think there's any reason why a lawmaker from Grand Forks or Cavalier or something has to drive all the way to Bismarck on a regular basis when they could just fire up Skype or something and do it remotely. I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but I don't really see. I mean, it's such a huge sacrifice to be able to do it. It really, it's a very specific sort of person who can serve.
When I think about, when Erin was first approached to run in 2014, so she would have been probably 30. We didn't have kids. So she did it, right? If she'd get approached today with a 4-year-old at home, busy lives, whatever, I'm not so sure she says yes as a working mom compared to somebody without kids back then. And I keep bringing up kids just because I have a 4-year-old at home who I've been in charge of getting to daycare this week, and it's been a disaster, and I know how stressful it is. So I keep bringing that up. But yeah, I think that trying to figure out a way to get better people, and I think your point about business, if you want to recruit and retain better employees, what do?
Yeah.
You pay them more. I mean, that's how you recruit folks.
One of the most remarkable things in politics that drives me nuts is the complaints about, well, what are these idiots in the legislature doing? They're terrible. They're out of touch or whatever. And then election day rolls around, and the re-election rate for incumbents is like over 90%. And
Right.
that's not unique to North Dakota. Look at the re-election rates for incumbents in the United States House of Representatives that campaign every 2 years. It's over 90%. Even the senators, who, by dint of having to represent a whole state, a lot of times, I think they find themselves in more competitive races than members of Congress who have districts, obviously. But even their re-election rate is typically in the 80% region. I mean, so if they're so, on one hand, it's fashionable to say, oh, these politicians are terrible, they're out of touch or whatever, and then election day rolls around and we reelect them all.
Yeah. Well, I get like actually angry when people take just broad shots at politicians. I mean, I'm the son. My late father was a member of the House of Representatives. My wife is in the Senate. My brother served in the Bismarck City Commission. I assure you, they all gave a whole heck of a lot more than they got from it, right? Because they wanted to give back to their community. So when people broadly say all politicians are bad or self-serving or whatever, and you talked about during the interim, going to interim meetings and the time-consuming nature of that. That doesn't take into consideration going to your local chamber meetings,
right,
going to this meeting and this. These are time-consuming jobs, even if you're doing the job well. I'm sure there's
right.
some legislators who don't do all that stuff. But if you truly are representing your community and wanting to get all,
then you're gonna end up going to county commission meetings. You're gonna end up going to city council meetings because you got to hear what they have to say, and you got to communicate with them and coordinate with them on the interests of your district. So it's a huge. But again, that's just sort of the populist idea, right and left, where it's people who are just angry and not really taking the time to understand what they're doing. You were making a point about being, anti-intellectual or whatever, and it almost, I feel like I read this really interesting thing, written by a blog, and now I'm forgetting where I read it, but he made a point about how it's not really ideological anymore. It's, what did he call it? I think he called it mood association, right? Where somebody has a mood that they're in, and or a mood that they feel about a particular topic or a particular candidate, and then they go looking for information or commentary or reporting or what have you that matches their mood. And I thought that was right, and it's not even really ideological. It's just, I am negative about politicians, so I just want to read negative things about politicians or whatever it is. And I think that's just so harmful to our society.
And I'm going to vote for people who say all politicians are bad. I'm going to vote for people who have this same anger perspective. I mean,
yeah. My favorite line from Governor Burgum's campaign was, "I'm not a politician," says the guy campaigning for public office. If you're campaigning for public office, you're a politician, and that's not a bad thing.
Right. Well, I always get a kick out of it, and I've, overall been pretty pleased with Governor Burgum and how he's handled like the pandemic and some other things. But I always get a kick out of, it's only every 4 years that people talk about term limits. And then nobody ever introduces a bill on term limits or anything. But every campaign, I'm going to go and fight for term limits. Okay, do it. Yeah. Introduce a bill. Do something about it.
Well, nor should they introduce a bill about term limits, because I think the voters should be allowed to pick whatever group of idiots they want, and the voters ought to get what they voted for, good and hard.
Rob, I agree 100% with you on that. I mean, I think about the legislature right now and some of the institutional knowledge of some of the folks who are really great legislators. I mean, Rich Warder, Ray Holmberg, people like Tim Mathern, people like that. I don't want them to go. I mean, they're the ones that are sort of making that machine run in a good way. So I'm against term limits.
Yeah, I am too.
From a partisan perspective, it might work well right now, but from my perspective.
From your perspective, yeah. But that brings us to another thing. The debate over campaign transparency in the legislature, because obviously that's built into a lot of. They had a bill, and it was just some modest changes. I mean, it wasn't really, but we're gonna because a lot of campaign committees in North Dakota don't have to report expenditures. So basically, it was if obviously Governor Burgum made a lot of people in the legislature upset because he put money in a multi-candidate political action committee, and then they didn't have to necessarily report their spending, and they campaigned for a lot of legislators. Although the funny thing about that controversy is that all but one of the slate of legislative candidates anyway that he campaigned for, and the statewide candidate that he campaigned for, were endorsed by their local committees. I mean, it wasn't like he was trying to overturn, except in one instance, Jeff Magram's campaign. He supported somebody other than Magram, who had his local district endorsement. But outside of that, most of them were endorsed by their local district. So I don't know. But anyway, the bill was to put some additional reporting requirements in place. And it was shot down because the excuse was, well, it's too much paperwork. And we live in a digital age. Have you guys never heard of Google Sheets where you can – there's no reason why they couldn't report every penny in and every penny out every week. Like every Friday, you got to dump it all up into the database, and then I could get on over the weekend and find all the fun stuff. There's no reason why we couldn't do that.
2 years ago, when the governor was spending all the money from the multi-candidate thing, first of all, kudos to his camp for figuring out how to register in a way that you didn't have to report expenditures by doing this multi-candidate thing.
Right.
But all these legislators all worked up about where is he spending this money? We deserve to know. And then we get to this. I mean, it passed overwhelmingly in the House. It had bipartisan support. And then in the Senate, it got shut down because of paperwork and the additional FTEs that the Secretary of State's office would need. Are you kidding me? I mean, the U.S. Senate candidates who spend tens of millions of dollars have the ability to say where they're spending the money.
I've had a lot of fun looking at those reports.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting things in there sometimes, especially how a senator spends her money when she gets out of office. It's hugely interesting.
I don't want to get into that. That was an agreed upon topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's funny when you hear all these stories about legislators. I remember a story of a Republican incumbent who was talking about, well, I don't know how you would even categorize your expenses or know how much money you've raised because I just put all my contributions into my personal bank account. So I don't know how you'd spread that out. I mean, this was like decades ago, right?
Yeah.
And that, so I mean, we've made some progress from those days, or stories about people buying suits. So we had to put in a law that you can't use it on personal things. But I think I told you the other day, Erin raised $130,000, and she could tell you to a penny where every one of those dollars came from and how everyone was spent using the advanced technology of Google Sheets.
Yeah.
And easily upload it to any sort of.
It's not tough. And I mean, just what you don't even have to like email it. Just like share the Secretary of State's office on the thing. Like they can log in and see it all in real time. Like I
also get a kick out of the last couple of campaigns for Secretary of State Jagger have all been about not keeping up with the technology and that kind of thing. And then they walk down the hall and say there's too much paperwork to do these reports. And I should be careful there. I don't know that was it the Secretary of State's office that said too much paperwork?
Well, no, it was lawmakers on the floor during the floor debate that said it. I think this probably came from the Secretary of State's offices. They were going to need more FTEs, I guess. Which we have the database, just more frequent reports. It's not that hard, and it's not like they're reading, because in my experience, usually when there's some error in the report, like it's kind of like in baseball, right, where the umpire's not going to make the call, one of the teams has to point out the problem, and I'm fine with that, right? I mean, everybody's looking at everybody else's reports. If you see a problem, you tell the Secretary of State's office about it, then they're going to do something about it. I'm fine with that. All it's going to be is more frequent reporting. What are we afraid of? Like, what's the big thing? And I honestly, I don't think that most, like 99% of the lawmakers have anything at all nefarious that they're trying to hide. I think they legitimately just don't want to be bothered with it. And
right.
And my A, it's not that much of a bother, and B, tough noogies, right?
Yeah.
Just do it.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that drives me crazy every election cycle: when North Dakota United gives out our PAC contributions, and then I see that pre-primary report, and half the legislators we give reportable contributions to don't report them. So I have to call individual candidates, say, remember that check for $250 you cashed? You need to report that thing.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder how many people aren't following the basic laws we have now.
I don't know. And how would we know? I mean, that's and again, I don't want to make this sound like I think a lot of nefarious stuff is going on, because I don't. I mean, sometimes a certain contribution doesn't become important until later. I mean, it's not made nefarious, but sometimes there's connections to be drawn.
But being completely transparent, you can remove those questions if there's something nefarious going on. I've never understood it.
So let's go back to what we're talking. And obviously, I've made the Bastiats a bit of a hobby horse. And people, I always get amused when people say that I'm obsessed about a topic or whatever. I mean, that's just the way I work. And maybe people aren't used to it. I mean, I came up as a blogger, so when I latch onto an issue, I'm like a dog with a bone. I gnaw on it, and that's just the way I work. So the Bastiat thing is very much in my mind right now, and I think the left has extremism issues as well. I mean, we look at Portland burning. I mean, we look at people who are making. I mean, right here in North Dakota, Lloyd Omdahl has an article, and the headline was only. What was it? It was something like only burning causes changes, right? So that's the standard now, is we're only going to get change if we light buildings on fire. There's so much extremism, and then right, nobody on the left is going to listen to a conservative be critical of their extremism, right? Because it's just, well, you're just trying to diminish us, or you're just trying to undermine us. And nobody on the right's going to listen to a liberal complain about it. And so it comes down to, if you're on the right, you kind of have to police your own. And if you're on the left, you got to police your own, because you're the only people who have the credibility to talk about it, which is what I'm trying to do with the Bastiats. And that's I'm winning a lot of new liberal followers on social media who are then immediately upset when I write another column and it's clear that, nope, he's still a conservative. Right. I am not in favor of this anti-intellectual reactionary movement that's predicated on the idea that the people who disagree with you are not just wrong but evil.
So Rob, I'm practical, right? If I'm a Democrat, I'm the former executive director. I have so much sympathy for the executive director of the Democratic Party, every chairperson. I know how hard those jobs are in a state like North Dakota, where you're dealing with, a party in Washington that's not exactly talking to our voters out here. And I, one of the things that a wise person once told me is the people of the left are just as far left in North Dakota as they are in any other state. There's just fewer of them. And so they're really loud, and you need to figure out a way to still bring those people in to something bigger, but you have to win before you can do anything. So I agree that there's self-policing, but I'm going to be a little critical of you again. I mean, we started out this way, so why don't I do this? One of my frustrations with your blogs over the years is I remember you doing a blog about some guy in Minot who self-proclaimed himself as the chair of the Democrat Renewable Energy Caucus or something.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of the guy, but the headline in your column was Democrats Think Boom. And it was based all on this random activist where his opinion was painted over all Democrats.
He was on the party's website, though, because I remember tracking that down, where he was on the party's website named that. Part of the the Green Energy Caucus or something like that.
But do you take every crazy thing that a Republican legislator does and paint it on John Hoeven and Doug Burgum? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I feel like sometimes in a state where Democrats don't have much power, that we often get painted as the worst among us, but that doesn't necessarily happen the other side, right? Your criticism of the Bastiats about the Bastiats. It's not necessarily about Republicans.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to make a point here, and I don't doing
it. I could tell you what my perception of that is a lot of times I perceive Democrats, and you'll probably tell me I'm wrong, but I perceive Democrats as a lot of the moderate positions that they take are put-ons, right? Because every election cycle we get statewide Democratic candidates who are trying to run away from the National Democratic Party. For obvious reasons, the National Democratic Party is toxic in most parts of North Dakota. So I don't blame them for doing it. It just strikes me as completely disingenuous and not representative of what candidates actually think. Heidi Heitkamp campaigned as, she flirted with maybe being in the Trump administration, right? She didn't exactly shoot down those rumors. She benefited from that. To the consternation of Kevin Cramer at the time, who was, very much trying to ride Donald Trump's coattails, and then you had Heitkamp sort of trying to elbow, and it was smart politics on her part, but completely disingenuous. I think the Heidi Heitkamp that's now on cable news, putting down conservatives, I think that's a more now that she's not campaigning for a public office, I think that is a more accurate reflection of who she is. So I don't know. I struggle with the idea that it's not genuinely represent. It's fair. It's one guy, I guess. But also, we live in a political environment where I hear Democrats, talk about the oil industry as in a negative light, our oil industry, our coal industry in a negative light a lot. I mean, it happens a lot. And these are genuine things that the Democrats actually say in our state.
Yeah, and so I'm going to first of all defend Heidi Heitkamp because I just fundamentally disagree with. She's one of the most honest people I've ever met.
I don't agree.
I've been.
I don't agree. I mean, her brother read my divorce papers on air. Her campaign contacted my employers and tried to get me fired every week. I don't think she's an honest person. I think that's the veneer she paints over herself publicly.
So I mean, I don't want to get into that personal stuff, obviously, but I mean, I've been in rooms with Heidi Heitkamp where there's been a bunch of progressives, and progressives are beating the living hell out of her for her position on fossil fuels or guns or something like that, and she doesn't back down. And there's no press around. There's nobody. She believes those things. I've been before the Brett Kavanaugh vote. I was in a room with her where, I mean, she was talking about her opinion, and this was before the thing started, the trial with the woman whose name I forgot, and she was really honest about, I think that a president gets to appoint people who he likes, or if they're qualified. And the hearing literally changed her position on that. That's genuine.
Yeah, well, she didn't listen to the hearing. Remember, she watched his body language, and that's what put her over the edge.
Well, but I will just say, I think that there's a reason why Heidi Heitkamp got elected in 2012. It's because people connected with her in a way. I think she had no chance in the world of winning in 2018. I mean, I saw the poll numbers from the beginning. It was never happening. But I think some of the criticism of Heidi is unfair, but it also, I mean, I don't know all the background stuff, right?
Yeah, well, maybe. And I mean, let's face it. You and I are different politically. So, what you might consider to be fair criticism of, say, Kevin Cramer or Doug Burgum, I'm probably going to disagree, and that's how that is. Now, that being said, I don't think Heidi Heitkamp's an evil person. I just don't think she's the aw shucks politician that she plays on the campaign trail. I think she's ruthless in a lot of ways, and maybe that is what it is. I have very little patience for put-ons, and if you'll remember how hard I rode Doug Burgum when he was campaigning for office, because I thought his campaign was the phoniest goddamn thing I'd ever seen. I'm an outsider or whatever. I mean, you've been an insider in Republican politics for decades, Doug. Don't put me on. And his embrace of Donald Trump, I don't think was at all authentic. I mean, I had a lot of problems with that, and I had absolutely no problem at all talking about him. So I don't know. I stand by my track record of being pretty consistent in my criticism within the confines of understanding also I'm a conservative. At the end of the day, I'm a conservative.
You've been consistently criticizing Heidi Heitkamp. I'll give you that. That's one thing we can agree on in Heidi Heitkamp.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't know. I am thinking about writing a Sunday column about Republicans ruining the day, and North Dakota Republicans specifically ruining the day that they opened the door to Trumpism. Because I don't know that they're going to be able to put the toothpaste back in the tube. I think they rode his coattails. They rode that moment in history. But now there's a bill that's coming due. And the bill that's coming due is a significant portion of their base that is conspiracy, addled by conspiracy, and completely unreachable in terms of normal avenues for persuasion, because they don't trust them. If you're either with Trump or you're part of the establishment, or Bill Gates got into your blood system through your vaccine or something like that. I mean, that's where they're at. This is what they opened the door for, and I'm afraid they're gonna pay for it, probably to the benefit of the state's Democrats.
So I think it's really interesting to think back about the 2020 election and the embracing of Donald Trump in the campaign, right? I mean, there was moderate traditional Republicans who were in high-profile races, whose mouthpieces were all, standing next to Donald Trump, and Trump's my guy. So many of those people, when you have private conversations with them, again,
don't like it.
They don't feel comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And I think at some point that does, when you're not completely forthright in your sort of opinions on those kind of things, and you're using it for short-term political gain. I mean, it's only a matter of time before those things come back. As far as benefiting the Democratic Party, I've been hearing about this pendulum swinging back for Democrats for about 30 years now, my whole adult life. Not that long, only 20 years. I aged myself a little bit. But I worry that there is no way for North Dakota Democrats to break through what's going on in Washington. Where Democrats have been successful in red, I think there's 3 districts in the whole state, maybe 4, that it's beneficial to be a Democrat. Other than that, it's probably a net negative or neutral. In those places where like Joan Heckabin, Erin Oban, Alyssa Mitzcog, those places where they've been able to win, they've managed to connect with voters in their community in a nonpartisan way. Because if you've got token Republican, token Democrat, the Republican's going to win every single time. But it takes a hell of a lot of work, and it's super, super hard. So I really worry about the Democrats' ability in the short term to break through, even in legislative races. I think statewide races, it's going to be a long while before a Democrat is really competitive.
We have a question. Clint asks on the live chat, gentlemen, wouldn't North Dakota be better served by a more balanced state legislature? And I think Chad is going to say yes, because his party is not in power right now. I've never believed in balance for balance's sake. I think that if North Dakotans want to be governed a certain way, they ought to vote that way, and you shouldn't necessarily vote for people just because you want to create some artificial sense of balance. In much the same way that, I struggle with when we're putting, admissions quotas or hiring quotas, and we're going to start hiring people because we feel like we need more of a certain skin color or more of a certain gender or whatever. As much as I want everybody to have opportunities and I want everybody to succeed, if you start making decisions based on that sort of thing, I don't think it ends well. So I don't think you should vote for Democrats because you just feel there should be more balance. If you want to be governed a certain way, vote for the people who are going to govern you that way, and let the chips fall where they may. So I'm not necessarily in favor of balance just for balance's sake.
So partisan Chad says the world would be better if there were more Democrats in the state capitol. Nonpartisan Chad, in my current professional role where I work with both parties on behalf of public education and public employees, I will tell you what I want is I want a majority of both chambers to be thoughtful and be willing to have conversations about reason and not be reflexive, want to actually solve problems, not just make political points. We're close right now. 2 years ago, 4 years ago, we were there. The vast, particularly in the Senate. I mean, so many things that are passing the House this year. I mean, last session or the session before would have went to the Senate and died a quick death. I think you about the mask bill, the transgender youth. I mean, some of those things that now have legs in the Senate because we did see 5 or 6 seats not only change from Democrat to Republican, but maybe more traditional Republican to more conservative Bastiat-like Republican. So my wish is balance in terms of thoughtful legislators more so than partisanship.
Yeah, although thoughtfulness can be in the eye of the beholder too, in that you look at something like, and I don't support the transgender bill in the legislature because I don't think it's the right solution. My problem though is with people who carry on as if there's no role for public policy in that area, at all. The point I've been trying to make is, to veer off, I guess, into the transgender debate, as we have just a couple of minutes left, uh, and so we're definitely not going to do it justice. But
We should certainly solve it in the next 2 minutes.
yeah, oh sure, our society, in a lot of ways, both good and bad, is organized around the traditional notions about gender. As a libertarian minded guy, I don't really have a problem with. I struggle sometimes to understand transgenderism because it's not me. That's a difficult thing for me to understand at times, and so I try to read about it. I try to understand it, but it's not my lived experience. I don't have any experience with it. I don't have any frame of reference for this. But I am generally in favor of live and let live. I am generally in favor of people living their lives the way they want to live their lives. And if you feel more comfortable as a woman, if you were born a man, I'm gonna use all, because I never know which term. That's the part of the problem too. Is it feels like there's minefields all around this stuff. I'm trying to just talk about it honestly, and I don't want to make anybody upset. I'm trying to be respectful about this, but if you feel like you're most comfortable as a woman, or you're most comfortable as a man, or you're most comfortable maybe not having, like, non-binary, I'm not here to judge you, and I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. But that doesn't change the fact that society has been organized a certain way for a long, long time, and there's a lot of people who feel very comfortable with the status quo. And I think that there's policy making, and I don't know what it is. I mean, that's part of the problem, is I don't know what the solution is. But I think there is a role for public policy where we can recognize that our transgendered friends and neighbors are trying to come out of the shadows and live their lives the way they want to live their lives. And we know how to find ways to accommodate that without necessarily throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
And I think we can do that, but so much of the time, the reaction is, if you want to have a transgender bill, it's immediately, you're a bigot, you're a terrible person. Why are you even talking about this?
But Rob,
I think that's unfortunate.
I think you've just made the case for why the legislature should pass the study that passed the Senate to sort of figure out this kind of thing. Because my concern is, we're going to rush into something that's going to have really, really terrible ramifications economically for the state. But much more importantly, we're sending a message to a bunch of kids that are already probably hurting, that they don't belong here.
I think there's ways that we can talk about it. See, I think, I don't know if I'm talking about it perfectly, but I think there are ways that we could talk about it that are sensitive. To say, listen, we respect who we are. We love you as a human being, but we got to figure some stuff out on how to make this stuff work, and that there is a role for public policy in that. But what's not helpful, I think, is constantly invoking, well, the NCAA is going to give you guys a spanking if you don't do what it wants. Do you think that's helping the debate as we try to work this stuff out that's already not very easy?
Sure. The reality is, we have to have reality in these conversations, right? If the NCAA is not going to bring tournaments here, that's a big deal. If folks aren't going to come to Fargo,
I like that the NCAA, which is one of the most venal and corrupt organization in America, is now the paragon of virtue on this particular flipping issue.
Right. But I think, we can't just say there's not going to be economic detriment if we pass this bill just because we say it's not going to. I would also encourage the supporters of the transgender bill is maybe sit down with some transgender individuals and have a conversation about what can be done. And I mean, you said that it's sort of uncomfortable. You don't get it because it's not your lived experience. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of us, right? And I can almost guarantee these folks who are pushing this probably have sat down with the transgender individual.
I should say I haven't sat down with them face to face because we don't live in the same communities. But I've had emails, I've had phone calls with them. I'm open to it. I'm talking with them.
But Rob, the idea that these proponents think that there's people just willy-nilly changing their gender in order to win a track meet is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that's sort of some of the message coming from the proponents.
But that has happened. I mean, that has happened in a few places where it's rare, and it's gotten probably more media attention, which creates the impression that it's a lot more common than it is. But it has happened.
But we do have a policy already through the North Dakota High School Athletics Association that has proven to work.
Yeah.
And we're solving a problem that doesn't exist without knowing what the repercussions are.
Perhaps.
So.
But I do think we can have conversations without immediately jumping to the idea that if you disagree with me, or if you want to open the conversation, that you're doing it because you're bigoted. or you're motivated by hate or something, the amount of time we spend questioning one another's motivations is not terribly helpful. Which is
Rob,
always
I think that's fair, but I also think some of the people pushing this are bigoted. I
well,
mean, that's just the reality of it.
that could well be. Although there's a lot of ways to hate too. I mean, there's a lot of
Right.
ways. A lot of ways to hate. I always laugh when people are talking about motivations because I think I watch on Twitter sometimes as people try to work out what's motivating Rob Port and what three-dimensional chess. I have a story actually. I grew up working for my dad right out of high school. He was a private investigator. He was a long-time homicide investigator in the state of Alaska, and I helped him on criminal defense cases. We did background checks. I did surveillance. I mean, we did a lot of stuff. And one thing that when he was working a case and he was trying to get the facts is, and he said he did this one as a cop. It was just always straight at him, right? I'm not hiding anything, right? I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just coming right at you. And he said sometimes you just lean on a person or you punch them in the nose and then you see what falls out of their pocket, right? That's my approach to everything. I think sometimes people think that I'm playing some game or being told something, and a lot of times it's just exactly what I'm telling you it is. In fact, every time it is. I am not a complicated person. But it's funny because that's my personal experience with it. Is Port's motivated by this or he was bought off by that person. And honestly, I write my columns and then I hang out with my kids and read books, and I don't really go to any cocktail parties. I wish I got invited to as many cocktail parties as people think I go to.
So it is or is not COVID brain that's pushing this.
Yeah. My friend and former employer Scott Hennon thought it was COVID brain. He posted that on Facebook. I mean, listen. My personal experience with COVID has informed a lot of my impatience with some of the vaccination stuff, where people are the conspiracy theories about vaccinations. The resistance to masking, I think, has been, I don't like mask mandates. I wish they hadn't been necessary. I wish people had just chosen to wear masks, and then it could have just been. I mean, what does it cost you? Not that we need to get into the whole mask debate, and we are over time here. But that's one thing I will tell you that that definitely informed it, and the attack on the Capitol. I think before that, I could understand why people supported Trump. I don't see how you could watch that attack on the Capitol and watch how the president of the United States at the time reacted to it. And still consider yourself to be a Trump supporter. It doesn't make any sense to me. Last word to you, Chad.
Well, I just appreciate you having me on today. I think this was an enjoyable conversation, and all the people who are mad at me for coming on and talking to you, I hope you watched and listened this and know it wasn't some terrible setup.
Yeah. And I hope all the conservatives understand. Rob Port's still a conservative. I'm just not ever going to be a Trump supporter. Who frankly was not conservative, as I think he added more to the national debt in 4 years than Barack Obama did in 8, and we were all upset when Obama was doing it, but somehow it's okay when it happens under Trump. Come on. Anyway,
we're all hypocrites, man. We're all hypocrites.
Everybody's a hypocrite. Chad, thanks for your time.
Thank you.